So here we have Devon Graves, Rock Hard Greece, and Devon, welcome.
Thank you.
Um, God-Shaped Void was voted the best album of the year that was out in Rock Hard Greece. But now that you are touring Greece and you are playing the whole Bleeding album, I would like to concentrate on this album, which might have been your last one, but fortunately for
Yeah,
us
yeah.
and everybody, is not. So let's discuss some interesting stories that had happened before, during, and right after this album. Okay.
Okay.
Uh, so, which do you think was the element that made a few fans not consider Mosquito good enough to carry the Psychotic Waltz logo? Was it because they thought that it was less proggy than the previous couple of albums?
That's my first thought. And and I understand it too. We were actually kind of conflicted during that time because the first two records we did ourselves. We produced it ourselves. We had good engineers. I know we said that Ralph Hubert produced Into the Everflow, but that's actually not true. We produced it and he engineered it, and he just got that credit because we let him have that credit. But and definitely there was this shift because we got a manager from Los Angeles and a producer, Scott Burns. And when both of these elements came in, then other people started getting into this soup, this mixture, suggesting what could it be that would make it more successful, you know? And it wasn't like, oh, okay, that we're just being told by people to do it. That's not really it. It was that we wanted to do something good too, you know? What Scott Burns would say to me, and he would listen to my melodies and he would almost get pissed off. And he would say like, "Look, man, I've been listening to this song over and over and I cannot remember it. I cannot remember your melodies." And he said, "That's a bad thing." And I said, "Well, I can remember them. To me they're easy, you know. But I'm doing what I do, you know. I don't want to write like catchy pop music, you know." And he had an interesting point. He said, "You can't tell me that in all your favorite bands that you listen to, that they didn't find a way to make their melodies memorable." And that that made me, I don't know, I guess everybody was trying to, I guess, meet halfway, you know, to try and do something that would, I don't know, get us more attention, break us through a little more, get a wider audience. But the real change happened, and the change that persisted through uh, Mosquito, then through Bleeding, and Mosquito, in my opinion, is more prog than Bleeding,
Yeah.
and the same for A God-Shaped Void. But that change didn't have anything to do with people like Scott Burns or our manager. Um, that had to do with us having some experience playing bigger rooms. When we were playing in the jam room, it's a very small, tight room. And you can play all this staccato stuff, double bass stuff, and you can hear everything because it's a very small space. And once we started getting out and playing in bigger rooms, to us it started sounding like this big cement mixer, you know, because like all these notes would be coming off the fretboard, coming out of the amps, and then kind of washing around in these rooms. And I was seeing other bands like Jane's Addiction, for example, playing far less and reaching the backside of that room, and even reaching people like myself. And we all thought our music needs to be more appropriate for a bigger space so that the sound can travel and that it can be heard and not get all. So we started writing with that in mind, and we never stopped writing that way because that's actually music that we like. We love Sabbath. We love Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin. We love also the prog bands too, you know, Yes and Rush. We love that too. But when we were doing it, we started noticing how other bands were also doing this, and it seemed like they were being complicated just for the sake of being complicated, you know, making weird timing changes just for the sake of fooling the listener. And we started to realize that it's a fool's game to try and outsmart your audience. You know, we need to reach them. We need to give them this music. We can't make it something so difficult to understand. And so this was this conscious decision about our own selves, our own evolution, and what music we were starting to like, trying to have our music translate in bigger venues, and trying to reach people without them having to hear the song 10 times before they decide it's really great. Because most people don't give you that chance. They listen to it once, and if they're not into it, they don't give you a second chance. Most people don't. And so in changing towards something that we thought was going to be, I don't know, more accessible to people, we never for one second forsaked what it is we love about music. You know, we love the complicated stuff, we love the simple stuff, but it's, to me, it's much harder to make a simple idea that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what we're always in pursuit of, even to this day.
Yeah, as I say, it's much more difficult to write a 4 minute catchy song than write a 10 minute epic, because in
Yeah,
10 minutes
and
you have all your ideas, and you do not condense your ideas into something compact. That
well, even it's not even to me about the, like, the length of the song. It's about the technical construction of it. Like, when we were first together, you got to remember, we were coming, two of the guys in the early days of this band, we were picking up from high school. The rest of us were just 1 year out of high school. So, like, we're teenagers, right? And Metallica's coming up, Iron Maiden's coming up, and Queensryche was coming up, and I guess Iron Maiden had been up for a little while, and and Judas Priest was coming out, well, had been out, of course, but, like, you know, all these bands have these singers that could sing really high. They have these harmony guitar players that are kind of progressive. So we were trying to beat that. We were trying to one up our favorite bands. We were trying to be the next evolution. Like, if we looked at Sabbath, then Judas Priest, then Maiden, then Queensryche, Psychotic Waltz was what we were thinking that would be what it evolves into,
yeah.
something. And so I was singing way the fuck up there, and they were doing everything they could. I remember Dan and Brian specifically saying that I want to make music that is impossible for a guitar player to figure out. And that's the mind of an ambitious teenager, you know, or, okay, maybe I was 20. Okay. But that was the mindset of people that are that young and that hungry. But eventually, after, here's the thing, you know, like, I grew up listening to Bowie and Sabbath and Hendrix and Tull. Jethro Tull was the most progressive thing I listened to. And I didn't even listen to the progressive Tull albums, you know, like Stormwatch and all that. I was more into Aqualung and Benefit, the real simple, folky 3/4. Pink Floyd, all that stuff we were into. And I had a record player my whole life, and I grew up learning music with that record player and putting these records on and listening to them and having this experience and building myself out of this music that I'm hearing. And by the time we made our first record, by the time I took A Social Grace home on an LP and put it on my record player, that was the first time I realized something that kind of disappointed me a little bit, because that music was so different from anything I was listening to. You know, it was it was so wild. It was so different that I felt like what happened what happened to I don't know what happened to where I started, what happened to I kind of like lost myself
Yeah.
in this competition, in this young youthful competition of trying to be the most amazing,
Yeah.
you know.
And speaking about your voice, in Bleeding, your voice seems a bit more low key.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, I believe it's more mature than ever. Was it difficult back then for you to hit high notes, or was it a conscious decision?
No, no, it was a conscious decision. I could still hit those high notes, maybe not as often.
Yeah,
I don't know if I
sporadically,
could
yeah.
pace. I couldn't pace a show the way I could have done in my 20s, but I could still hit every one of those notes. And but it was definitely around that same time, you know, we're going out and we're playing, and then we're playing with other bands, and every band would have a singer that would come out, yeah, you know, they would do that high note right in the first before they even sing any words, you know. And I remember I was in Vegas. I was in Vegas, I think. No, it wasn't Vegas, it was somewhere else. But it was in some desert. And I remember watching the band, you know, waiting for us to go on. And I remember thinking, one day, one day we're all going to look back at this and laugh. You know, we're going to look back at all this really high screaming and we're going to laugh, because it was cool when Robert Plant did it. It was cool when Ian Gillan did it. It was cool when Rob Halford did it. And then more and more singers. It was amazing when they did it. Let me rephrase. It was amazing. It was mind blowing. But then it became what everyone does, and that's when I started to kind of look the other way. And it was also that thing about listening to that record and wondering what happened to me. Why don't I remind myself of anybody that I've ever loved when I listen to my record, because I'm way up in that stratosphere. And I started thinking, man, Bowie never did that. Jim Morrison never did that. Like, they're just singing in a more natural register. And John Lennon and Paul McCartney and all the greats weren't way up in falsetto. You know, they were in a more natural register. And what I noticed is, for that reason, you could tell all of them apart. Every singer, you could tell Jim Morrison, you could tell David Bowie, you could tell, you know, Alice Cooper, you could tell any of those singers apart, just even Ozzy, just from the sound of their voice. But once you start getting in that 1 and 2 octaves higher, we all start to sound the same. And the only thing that's different is our vibrato, maybe.
Hmm.
So you can kind of distinguish them from their vibrato. But singers sound less and less and less unique, in my opinion, when they all sing in that high register.
Uh-huh.
And
Okay.
so I started to turn away from the crowd and start to find my own natural voice. And that was even happening that was even in Social Grace, like In This Place, you know. That's one of the songs that I can still listen to and still enjoy the sound of my voice. In This Place, I hit that mark. It was kind of a Jethro Tull sound for me. And also when I was getting into the second album, when we did Into the Everflow, that's when I started kind of really finding my own path melodically, you know. And I remember this one moment, because, you know, I started singing because I wanted to be Ronnie James Dio, and a little bit of Alice Cooper. And and Dio was God. I saw Dio more than I've ever seen any other singer. I've seen him so many times. I've seen him with Black Sabbath on the Mob Rules tour. I've seen him on the Holy Diver tour, and I've seen him several times since then. And I always wanted to be him, and I wanted to sing just like him. And you can hear it in my early work, even though I started singing higher because of the competition thing I was telling you about. but but there was this time, about the time we were doing Into the Everflow, and I had just written Out of Mind, the vocals for Out of Mind. And I was watching Ronnie sing. This was in Los Angeles at the LA Forum. And of course, I was totally enjoying it. But it was at that moment that I realized that I'm now different than him. I'm no longer trying to be him. I'm now something else. I'm now a different thing. And I was happy about that. I was happy that I discovered my what makes me me instead of what makes me want to copy somebody else. And so that was really coming in the Into the Everflow time period. And yeah, then when it came time to do a Mosquito, I think a little bit of blame could fall on me about, like, maybe where the audience was divided, and it was maybe because I really wanted to do another solo album, and I wanted to do the solo album in order to afford a better studio at home. I wanted to improve my studio, and the only way I could do that is if I got another solo record. And so in that time where I should have been focusing on the Mosquito record, I was working for the Mosquito record, but I was also doing way more work on my solo record. I was making songs like Locust, My Grave, Skeleton. That was going to be my solo album. And so I think that I'm kind of guilty of not giving everything of mine to Psychotic Waltz. I was keeping some of it for myself. I ended up giving it back on the Bleeding album. You can
Yeah,
see.
you gave all your songs to the
Yeah,
Bleeding album.
yeah.
However, you had worked with Scott Burns in
Yeah.
Mosquito, and this time you handled the production as a band, and Scott was just the engineer. Why did you do this?
We thought that Scott could help us get the sound we were looking for. And I, to be really honest with you, I have never been completely excited about the sound of any of our records, except for the God-Shaped Void. That's the first record we made that I was really happy about the sound. And that was the reason why I wanted my own studio. I just wanted my own hands on the knobs, even if I couldn't do it as good as the guys that weren't getting it right. Even if I couldn't do it as good, I felt like, fuck, I need to do it myself, because it's not, back in the analog days, it was such a different thing, because the engineer has to know how the mixing console and the tape machine is going to change your sound. And so he has to know how to fuck your sound up to begin with to make it come out right on the other end. And it's a moving target, and they don't really hit it. They never really got it. They got a good sound. It was a good sound. I think so. I think Bleeding has a really good sound. Mosquito has a really good drum sound. Man, I'll give Scott Burns that. He could really get a good drum sound. Um, but he was a nightmare to work with as a vocalist. He was just, oh, it was the worst. It was the worst. I almost quit music over that.
Okay. He was pushing you too far.
He, well, he was complaining about my ideas not being memorable without being able to offer
Yeah.
any creative
Alternative,
solution.
yeah. An alternative. Okay, you don't like this, so tell me, how do you want to what you want me to sing?
To
Okay.
which he would say, I don't write melodies.
Yeah.
And I would be like, well, I do. So just shut the fuck up. Let me do my job. You do your job. But hey, man, he he had his point. He had a point, and his point was taken. But that was something I took with me into production when I start to produce other bands. That I vowed that if I was if I was not happy with something they were singing, that I would offer a solution, and that is the way I do it. That is the way I do it. And they can either take it or leave it. I also don't force my suggestions onto them. I just tell them, like, hey, on this line or at this part of the song, you're kind of losing me here. I'm losing interest in this. It's not pulling me in. Let's try something else. And then maybe they would think, and maybe I would think, and I'd say, give me just a second here. And then I'd come up with a little melody, and then I would sing it. And then they would, 9 times out of 10, they would love it, and we would move on. And I always kind of wanted to be more like the Mutt Lange kind of producer that can, like, help them sing their backing vocals, help them craft their melodies, help them make their lyrics better and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so a lot came out of working with someone like Scott, but I don't want to completely discredit him because he had a point. He just didn't know how to articulate that point.
Yeah, I see. What was the reason that made Ward Evans leave the band and you substituted him with Phil Catino?
That was something between Dan and Ward, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I had no problem with Ward. I thought he was fantastic. Dan always thought that Ward had a negative attitude because Ward wasn't always on board with all of Dan's ideas. And Ward kind of fought the most about that.
Yeah. Okay.
But I also was that way too. It was always like somebody is always at odds with Dan because he's very headstrong and he's very has a very strong vision of what he wants, but he kind of forgets that so do we.
Yeah,
and
but it's easier. But it's easier to change the bass player than the singer.
Oh yeah, well yeah, but I didn't think that the bass player needed to be changed, but Dan did, and it was kind of like if that didn't happen, that it might have broke up the band. And for Ward, that ended up being a very good thing because he moved on to this DB99 with his friend Eric, and they had more success than we ever had with one song they had. It was in a TV series, I think Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He still gets checks from that. So I think that's like success is the best revenge,
I think he thanks Dan every day.
But I tell you this, there's two things that I wanted to say, like about Mosquito, that Ward played on the Mosquito album. And then after that record, Dan and him had that falling out, and Ward got kicked out. And then we hired Phil, and Dan put Phil's photo and credit on the album because he said, well, that's the guy everyone's going to see on tour. And he would say, like, that's what Ozzy does. That's what everyone does. And none of us were cool with that. It was like, hey, man, that's not cool. That's Ward's performance. Ward needs to be credited on that record. So that was a pretty uncool thing to do. And we've all talked about that since then. He and I, we've all got all that out of the air. But there is one thing that I want to say. There was one time when we were making the Bleeding album and Phil was doing his bass lines. There was one moment where Dan turned to me and he said, man, I miss Ward.
Yeah.
Because I think he realized that Ward, he never makes mistakes. Him and Norm are like a machine. They don't make mistakes. And I think when you play with somebody that doesn't make mistakes, then you begin to get a little spoiled with that. And then you start nitpicking the personality. Oh, let's get somebody that agrees with me more, right? And then you realize, oh my God, Ward was really fucking good.
Yeah, and this thing with this photo thing was done again with Brian and Steve Cox. Brian was replaced after Bleeding in the subsequent tour by Steve Cox. The initial pressing of the album, this one I have, does not have a photo of the band. In fact, nothing more than your names: Buddy Bryan, Dan, Norm, and Phil.
Mhm.
The re-release by Metal Blade, this double album with Into the Everflow, uh, features the photo of the touring lineup and not the photo of the recording lineup.
No kidding.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's
I did not know that. I
yeah,
did not know that. Yeah, that was when I moved here. They did that deal with Metal Blade.
yeah.
I thought Norm had gotten that deal. Uh-huh. Wow.
That's this picture.
Wow. Wow.
So he did it again. He did it again. Not only
I don't know.
his
I can't say that Dan's responsible for that one. I really can't say one way or another
maybe
because
Uda.
I wasn't there at that time. Maybe it was like Norm and maybe that was all they could find or they can come up with. But I have this box set here
Yeah.
that came out after that, and that has Brian's photo on the back. So yeah, that's news to me. I never knew that. But that's a little weird because at least in the mosquito thing, there was a
it has
yeah,
the photo on the back, but on the booklet, in the booklet, it has Steve's photo.
does it credit Steve for playing guitar on the record?
No, I don't think so.
At least there's that.
I don't think so, but uh, it would be it would be not unfair. It would be wrong. Uh, no, it doesn't credit anybody, to tell you the truth.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
No,
that's news to me.
the band is Phil, Dan, Norm, Brian, and Buddy.
Okay,
No
okay,
Steve.
okay. All right, well, that's at least fair. But see, you can't really defend that with that. Well, that's who he's going to see on they're going to see on tour because the tour's over. That came out long after the fact. That came out when I was living here in Europe, and nobody even contacted me about that whatsoever. In fact, when they were doing the Dark Millennium thing, that was when I'm like, you guys do whatever you want. I don't want anything to do with this Dark Millennium thing because I have never heard a live recording that I would say, boom, yeah, release that. Never. So I'm like, if you guys are going to release this, just do what you want. And I'm fading into the night here.
A very strong point of Bleeding is definitely the artwork made by Travis Smith. I mean, I know lots of people that started listening to Psychotic Waltz just because they saw the artwork of the album and they bought the album. That was back then when you bought an album just because of its artwork. If I'm not wrong, it was his first real job to create the cover
Yeah.
of Bleeding. Where did you find him and how did you work with him?
He was just our friend. He was one of the people that from time to time would come to our jam room and hear us play. He was a kid, like it was um, really surprised me like what he could do. And I don't remember why we stopped using Mike because Mike and Dan were like best of friends since they were like 9 years old. I don't remember. I think there was something going on with Mike. Maybe he was getting into drugs or getting into, I don't remember. I really don't remember, but um, for some reason he was no longer our guy. And Travis Smith just kind of, yeah, he showed us what he can do. And we said, yeah, we just went with him. There was no debate about it. And boy, oh boy, has he come a long way.
Yeah,
You know,
he's doing a
he's
career.
done every record for me since. He's done every Dead Soul Tribe record. He's done the God Shaped Void. And I love what he did on that. And I love how he had the homage to Mike's images on there. Really, really touching on the back of the album where you see the jester sitting on a swing and the bicycles next to the swing. And it signifies Dan and Brian, Dan and Mike's childhood, and the bike signified. Well, Mike got killed riding that bike. He got hit by a van, and yeah, so it's just really touching and really moving, and seeing that artwork kind of done in a different type of graphic like there's an evolution to it. So I really, really love
Yeah.
everything that Travis has ever done. And when it came to the Dead Soul Tribe stuff, almost everything, almost everything was like the first thing he showed me. I said, that's perfect.
Yeah.
He would just ask me for some song titles and for some lyrics. Um, and the only time I ever had to send it back was on the last Dead Soul Tribe album, which was A Lullaby for the Devil, because that cover that's on there, I had that specific idea in my mind. And I was saying, okay, it's like the devil, he's playing a flute and he's got one foot up, kind of like Ian
I
Anderson.
can understand.
And then he sent very, very different looking images, more like these tribal images and stuff. And I'm like, no, that's not it. It's, but then I talked to him and then he sent that and I'm like, that's perfect.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
And mentioning,
Not a lot of back and forth with him, at least not for me.
it's great when you know you have a partner that can do exactly what you want without having to go back and forth. That's
Yeah, I remember when we were doing the Everflow album, and you see, I don't know if you can see it too well, like this is not really the cover, but that tree and that came from a vision I had, and I was thinking more like a photograph, and I was saying like I could imagine seeing like it's moonlit, a tree branch over a flowing river, but I was imagining a photo to where the lighting was that you almost can't even tell what you're looking at, just kind of like this beautiful image. And then Mike came back with this painting, with the tree and the river and the moonlight, and
yeah,
absolutely not anywhere near my image. It wasn't the same, like, because Travis would send something and I'm like, that's exactly what I wanted.
yeah.
But with Mike, it was like, that's not at all what I wanted, but we all like it. And actually, I'm really happy that you even painted my idea, because I thought that I was just saying an idea that it would go nowhere.
Yeah. You mentioned right before Ian Anderson. Was the song I remember something that the fans always asked you, and you were forced in a way to have this kind of power ballad with a flute in every Psychotic Waltz album? Even your solo album as Buddy Lucky has the amazing, just like a timepiece.
Mhm.
That, that
I don't think the fans asked me for it. I just wanted to do it. I mean, that Jethro Tull, the Aqualung album, is the absolute framework of how I make music, of how I blend instruments. It all can be pointed down to that one record, Aqualung, where you have distorted electric guitars playing with piano, you have acoustic guitars also, or sometimes only acoustic guitars, and that flute. And I only learned flute because of hearing Jethro Tull records. I never had a lesson. I just had Aqualung, and I just copied that record and learned how to play really quite quickly. And but yeah, and not much has changed. The instrumentation, that's still my instrumentation, and it's I think beautiful to combine those elements all together. And I remember did that, and so did Just Like a Timepiece, that had the piano, the acoustic, the electric, and the flute all together. And that's just me. That's just the fan. Nobody asked me, hey, could you please do more like that? That's just me doing me, which is me doing Ian Anderson.
In the tour that followed, you performed 3 new songs. One was From Beyond, written by Steve Cox, and was later released as Incantation by T-Bag, the band that he formed with Norm.
Yeah.
What has become, okay, this is Steve Cox's song, we leave it. What has become of For the Sake of the Dead, penned by Steve as well,
Mm-hmm.
and Medication, that we have seen
Funny.
live footage of it on YouTube.
Um, this is funny, man. For the Sake of the Dead, I can't even remember that. I can't that title rings a bell. I can't remember the song. I can't remember it. The sound of it, it's
Yeah.
when and that was like when Brian left and Steve came in to fill his shoes. That, in my view, was for the tour. And I wasn't necessarily gonna want to continue on writing with Steve. I would have considered it, and I did consider it. I did. And Dan, that medication was more of Dan's work. But while they were doing that, I already had, when Brian quit, I said, okay, I'm out too. And I just finished the tour, 2 tours, in fact. But my plan was that I was going to go do my beloved solo album so I can finish my home studio. That's all I cared about, was my studio. And and so at that time, From Beyond, like Steve was trying to get me to sing certain things which I didn't want to sing, and nobody's ever done that to me before, you know. Um, Dan was writing stuff, and we were having this struggle, like when I would come up with a melody idea, but I know that it's not working with his guitar riff, but I would show him the melody idea without music, and I said, "Do you like that?" He said, "Yeah, I like that." And I say, "Okay, then we need to change one chord." And he would just stammer and never change the chord. And so what was happening at that time is we were writing music that I wasn't that in love with anymore. And at the same time, at home on my 16-track machine, I had Into the Spiral Cathedral, I had Black Smoke and Mirrors, I had The Haunted, I had a lot of songs that I liked so much more than what we were doing together with Steve.
Yeah,
And that's when I said, okay, man, I'm just stepping out, because I don't want to be part of this train wreck. I don't think it's going to be as good. I've never felt about Psychotic Waltz music the way I feel about this stuff we're writing right now. Which means I don't really care that much for it. I don't think it's that great, and I don't want to make a record that I feel that way about.
yeah. Although in your live performances on YouTube, you mentioned the fifth album of Psychotic Waltz. Who could believe that it would come out 30 years later? But anyway, did you feel you had enough backup from your label, Bulletproof and Intercord? For example, this
I
label.
don't know. I
It,
don't know, because everybody's always saying to us, like, "Oh, you guys deserve so much better. You deserve so much more success. Why is it that you?" And so it's natural to like blame the label or whatever. But what can I say? They gave us a chance. They let us put out the records. Maybe we weren't their biggest
priority.
priority,
Okay.
but they at least gave us a chance. And that was the thing I kind of learned along the way when I started producing other bands. I was producing some really good bands, and I would like turn them on to, say, like Inside Out or something, who I was with Denzel Tribe, and who also does the God Shaped Void. And every band I ever turned them on to, they turned them down. And that's when I realized how lucky I was, how lucky I am that I can just make some solo record and send it to them and get a deal. I got kind of spoiled that, wow.
Yeah, yeah. Um, can you explain to us what happened with the video clip of Faded? Who claimed that a light on the set cost him blindness?
the
Uh,
girl, the girl,
the girl
the
in the
girl that
car.
you see. Yeah, the girl in the car, and you can see she's looking. Yeah, you can see she's maybe she thought that she was so pretty she didn't want to hide her eyes,
Yeah,
because when you see the guy that's standing there, you can see the shadow from his hand is over his eyes,
yeah,
like a normal person would be, like any good actor would do, in fact, like this is, but she would seem like she wanted her eyes to be seen, so she was holding her hand up high. And but the problem was that Phil, the bass player, he was a film major. He's the one that directed that video. He also directed the My Grave video, and he did that stuff using 16 millimeter film. That was not done with video, it was done with film. And I got to really hand it to him, man. I don't know how anyone can get an image so great when you're looking into a camera. You see a viewfinder, but you don't see what your finished product is going to be. You know, when we're using our DSLR cameras and stuff, we see the lighting, we see exactly the exposure, and we can change it and tweak it. So you don't have to know photography. You just tweak it until it looks right. But when you're dealing with film, you don't have that. He has to know numbers and he has to know how this is going to work without seeing how it looks. So he did a phenomenal job, a phenomenal, really nice job using 16 millimeter film. But he made one mistake, and he did not have the actors sign a medical release.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I don't know if there's any validity to her claim. Whether, I mean, if she lost her, you know, I think she had a spot in her eye for a couple of days, you know, maybe it was worse, and maybe she misunderstood direction. And you know, and if that's the case, you know, I'm really sorry for her, but it seemed to me like a little more of an opportunistic thing. And I heard she sued the band, she sued the lighting company that manufactured the lights, and the company that rented the lights. Like I think she even tried to sue the university, because Phil was at the university and that's how he got all the
Yeah.
equipment and stuff. And I think she got everybody for about 5 grand, you know. Um, and Norm paid all that out of his pocket, and I just gave him a whole bunch of records. Just before I moved out to Europe, you know, like I went up to Norm with a bunch of records, and some of them were like picture discs of King Diamond, and there were some really good records. I just couldn't bring them all, so I gave him this big stack of really good records. He was working at a record store, and he looked at me and he said, "Man, we're even." So I wasn't held responsible for any share of that.
Yeah, was it at the point when you performed the lyrics "blinding light, winding sound, spinning grace defies the ground" in the end of the video? It's on in the end of the video where everything happened of faded.
Well, I think it's at the point before the guitar solo,
Hmm.
because I think, if I remember this video correctly, I think that they're looking up in the sky. See, I didn't quite get the premise of that video. I didn't get it that we were the aliens. I didn't get it. Like, I guess that's what the story was supposed to be, is that there was a UFO and these two people are out there in the desert and they see it, and when they're looking up like this, I think that's the scene that caused the damage. See,
Yeah,
just by doing what I did, I see a spot in front of my eyes, and I didn't do that for an extended time, so she could
yeah.
have damaged
So
herself.
the story ended. You had to pay her.
No, the band paid her about 5 grand, but I think that all came out of Norm's pocket.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
thing was is like, you know, I guess I would be like guilty by association, but I wasn't around for any of that video. Like, I didn't even pick that actress. I wanted a different one. You know, we got together and watched the audition tapes, and I picked somebody else anyway. And so
yeah,
nobody listened to me. And when they filmed that thing, for that, I wasn't there. You know, I wasn't like there telling him to look at lights or anything.
yeah,
But it's, you know, by association, you know, we're all kind of
yeah,
culpable.
yeah.
And so thank God I was able to give Norm a bunch of uh, really good records and pay my share of it to him.
So by listening to the amount of money, I don't think that this conviction, let's say, was the real reason for the band's premature demise.
No, 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 no,
Because
no, no.
this is
It was already
what
over.
is, yeah, because this is what is it's widely said.
Well, no, because Steve is in that video, right?
Mhm.
Steve's the guitarist in that video. So by the time we made that video, Brian was already out. And when Norm called me and said, "Hey, man, Brian's decided to leave the band," I said to him, "You know what? Me too." And that was already having been kind of fed up with the new music, and with the direction of how things were, and how I just didn't have the heart to continue without Brian and make a record that, look, man, let's face it, Dan and Brian, those guys, each of them might not be the world's greatest guitar player, but when you put them together, they are more than the sum of their parts. Those guys together are absolute genius. It's absolute magic. And I hear that when people, I've heard classical conductors who have listened into the Everflow. This one guy told me the story. I think he was from Denmark, and this was when I was already in Dead Soul Tribe. And he goes, listen, I need to tell you something. He said, my father is a conductor in an orchestra, and he hates metal. He hates it. And I was listening in my room, listening to into the Everflow, and he comes into my room and he sits down and he listens to it with me. And when the record was over, he pointed out everything that was great about that record. And then he asked if he could hear the whole thing again. And and I know that that has to do with Dan and Brian, and they compose in a way that is even I don't understand how great it is, but I feel it when we're playing together. I feel it. And when somebody, and that wouldn't be the only time I heard some classical type person praising the work of these guys. And that's because they're together when what they do together. And once that's separated, you can't just take somebody else, no matter how good of a guitarist, because Steve is a really great guitar player. I mean, really one of the best. But it's not just about your skill, it's about your ideas.
Yeah.
And once that got broken up, I just didn't want to destroy the whole thing by trying to make a record without him.
Yeah.
Exactly why we decided not to even go on the road without Brian any further. You know, we when the God-Shaped Void came out, man, I was so looking forward to doing our lap of victory, you know. We made a great record and I wanted to go out and play really well. We did a short tour before the record came out, but my voice was fucked up, and I had some good moments and some very terrible moments. And Brian the same. He was having carpal tunnel syndrome, so on some of the solos he just completely stopped playing because his hand was just paralyzed. So the whole solo goes by without him playing a note. So both of us, since then, when the record came out, then Brian went and got his surgery, and I kind of rehabilitated my voice, took some lessons, rebuilt my voice. And it was like, okay, now we're going to go out finally and do this right and redeem ourselves, make a great tour, and all good things will follow. And then Brian decided he can't tour anymore. Even when after he fixed his wrist, he was like, I just not going to do it, man. It's too dangerous. It's too dangerous. When he would come home in his 20s, when he would come home, he would spend weeks or months in bed with pressure sores. Those are deadly. That's Christopher Reeves died from pressure sores, if I remember correctly. And that was in his 20s when Brian couldn't deal with it. That's why he left after bleeding. But now, we're in our 50s and now he's like, forget it.
I'm not doing this. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's too painful.
And so we could have called up Steve. I would have probably done it. I just wanted to play. But when Dan said, no, not without Brian. And then
Yeah.
I said,
And what about a new record? What about a new Psychotic?
Well, man, the idea was that, okay, we'll do the Sergeant Pepper thing, like when the Beatles stopped touring, they started making their best music. So maybe that's what our new phase can be.
Yeah.
But man, I got to be honest with you, brother. I was just talking to Norm, and he said to me, this is what Norm said. I told him I was doing Dead Soul Tribe because, like, I have some new songs now that I really like, and I don't want to wait another 10 years before they come out. And it's been 3 years since we did the God-Shaped Void. It's been 3 years since we said we're going to make another album. Not one riff has come from them. Not one. Not one. And Norm said, mark my words, this time next year, there still won't be another one. There still won't be any riffs. And, I'm not trying to put him down. That's just the truth. That's just how it is. And I'm writing music, but like I said, I have one song that would be a great Psychotic Waltz song. But if I give it to him, I lose that song because what do I have to write like another 9 or 10 and then it'll be another bleeding album that everyone's going to hate because I wrote the whole thing? You know, if I want that, I'll just make a new Dead Soul Tribe record.
Yeah, yeah, I see that. And what should we expect from your live shows in Greece?
Okay, imagine if you look at I, the idea was that I always did these acoustic shows and I play some psychotic, I play some Dead Soul Tribe, I play some cover tunes. And Elias, my promoter, had this idea. He said, "Look, man, I want to make a concert where you play the entire Bleeding album, acoustic version of the Bleeding album." And I thought about that and I thought, well, I know I could at least play half those songs because I wrote half of them, but I don't know. I'll do what I can. And so I started to mess around with these songs, and it turns out I can play the whole album. I can, and I have this whole set ready to go. In fact, the only one that I'm not playing that great is one that I wrote because, and here's the thing, like you're going to hear the vocals singing that melody, but you're going to hear completely different chords under a lot of it because the psychotic waltz thing, and it's not just psychotic waltz, it's a lot of metal where a lot of the riffs, I mean, they might be, you know, they might be like playing a lot of stuff, but if you break it down to its simplest essence, like say Faded,
Yeah.
you know, it's pretty much one note. I mean, they're playing riffs, but if you break it down to its simplest thing, you're hearing kind of it's one tonic, and their riffs are glorious over that, and then I sing over that. And when it's a band playing that, it sounds great. But if you're doing an acoustic version of it, that's going to sound really, really
Simple.
lackluster. And so I have to take the same melody and come up with chord changes that support that melody. And in doing so, I've fallen in love with playing these songs this way. And so it's kind of like a singer songwriter version of these songs, but my vocals are almost exactly the same. It's just that I sing them with a different dynamic because I'm not like belting it out, you know, that also wouldn't be appropriate either. I'm singing it a little more sensitively and dynamically. It gets quiet, it gets loud, it's more emotional. Um, and yeah, it's to me, they're completely new songs. And in a lot of cases, I'm going to start playing something and people aren't going to know what I'm playing until I start singing.
Yeah.
And then they're going to go,
Oh,
oh,
that's it. Yeah.
yeah. So
So it's gonna be bleeding, the whole bleeding up,
the whole
except for
Bleeding
song.
album, but I'm also going to play some stuff from the God Shaped Void. I'm going to play some stuff from each album, from each Psychotic Waltz album, a little bit from each. Um, I will play plenty of Dead Soul Tribe stuff as well. And if there's time, I used to play cover tunes in my set, but I used to kind of need to kind of fill it out. And now with this whole Bleeding record that I can do, um, and with all the other songs that I have, it's probably going to be enough.
Yeah.
But if they won't let me leave, maybe I'll pull out a blues song or something.
Okay. So, Devon, before the end, I would like you to say a radio ID for Rock Hard Radio in Greece. Can you do that, please?
Sure. Well, this is Devon Graves. You're listening to Rock Hard Radio, Greece.
Devon, thank you very, very much. Uh, Hopefully, I'll be able to come and see you at the live show in Athens. So, we've hopefully I've kept good company with my
Yeah,
questions
yeah.
because it lasted long. So, uh,
Always does. I talk way too much.
yeah, but it's a matter of saying interesting things. So that's why I let you speak much, because if I don't like what is it's being told, I cut it.
Okay.
Okay, let's go to another subject. Okay, so
All
thank
right,
you very
man.
much. Look
Oh,
forward.
you're welcome. Thank you for having me. Really, thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time too, and I'll see you in Athens in a few days. Okay.
All right, man. Be sure to come up and introduce yourself, okay?